I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah.
Is this Becca?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Excuse me. Becca, I have never met you either, and this is a treat. Okay, I have to do all of this. It's important.
I'm going to introduce you for the people that will watch later on the camera, even
Great.
though everybody here knows you, it seems.
Well, not everybody, but this is a wonderful group.
Well, let's welcome Sheri Ritchlin. As everyone knows, she is an alum of the PCC program. She wrote her dissertation with E. Wu, Brian Swim, and Rick Tarnas. It was called The Return of the Sage, A New Cosmology Meets the Way of Heaven and Earth in the I Ching. She's also published, she's the author of Oneing, Dream to Awaken. And she has chapters in several books, including The Epic of Evolution, Science's Story and Humanity's Response, as well as Science, Wisdom, and the Future, and The Spirit of a Woman, Stories to Empower and Inspire. She's published articles in Corral Magazine, in Revision, and the Noetic Sciences Review. She's lectured widely in the United States, as well as in England. And she will also, I'm very excited to say, be presenting at the Whitehead Conference, the International Whitehead Conference, later this year.
Yeah.
In June 4th through 7th at Pomona College. I'll be there, Robert will be there, all the PCC faculty will be there, Becca will be there, and we're going to put on a good show. So if you like
Song
what you
and
hear
dance
tonight,
routines, you know.
yeah. So, enough said. Sheri, please,
Yay.
share your wisdom.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your coming out on a beautiful spring-like evening and sitting here instead of being outside somewhere. So thank you so much. The only introduction I'm going to give to this is just to say that this was originally given this spring at a Thomas Berry colloquium. I can't believe that you're all back here. This is wonderful.
It was great.
Because Drew was there, Allison was there. It was great. The University of North Carolina. And so I adapted this a little bit, but since I was back in town, I just couldn't resist bringing it all home, because this is where everything started. This is where I even met Thomas Berry for the first time, and of course Brian Swim. Everything began here, as you all know. Okay, what do I do for the change of?
You tell me to change it.
Okay, now the first thing we all did at this conference, and probably we need to do a lot, hoping not to drag the whole thing down here, is really define at least how I'm going to be using the word cosmology here. So what I did, I went back to the American Heritage Dictionary, and cosmos is defined there as the universe regarded as an orderly, harmonious whole. An ordered, harmonious whole, harmony and order as distinct from chaos. Cosmology is defined as the study of the physical universe considered as a totality of phenomena in time and space, the astrophysical study of the history, structure, and constituent dynamics of the universe, a specific theory or model of the structure and these dynamics. As you can see, there's a disjunction between those two. Next. Okay. Somehow the colors aren't, the fainter colors aren't coming out, but I've done the terrible thing here of taking you back to the right and left brain hemisphere of the brain, strictly as a metaphor. We've had this discussion along the way here. The reason I'm using this as a metaphor is, first of all, in the traditional, I don't know if you call it the traditional model, the original model, and actually I think this is still considered fairly accurate today, although neuroscientists would blanch at this separation. I know that, I understand that. But the left brain, even still, I think, is considered dominant, usually dominant for linear sequential processes. So this would be rational thought, logic, and so on. And of course, this is the source of our incredible advances in Western science. So it's very important. Okay. Right brain, in a general way, has been considered the part of the brain that processes things holistically, imagistically, processes images, tends to capture things in wholes. And even current research, I think, is really showing that a lot of the emotional, a lot of emotions really begin in this right brain side. The main reason I'm using this as as a metaphor is, first of all, I did this in the email. This is the corpus callosum that separates them, which really means, it's the corpus callosum, it means tough body. I call it the colossal corpse, just because it's just this dead space between these two completely different ways, although we know they're processed together. But they're a little bit like cosmos and cosmology. Also, the left brain is considered the region, still considered the region that's central to language. Now, at least Western languages, you can see how that would work, linear sequential. But also think about this. In our own language, we have a subject and an object. Subject, verb, object. Subject, predicate. This is important as we go on because you can begin to see that subject and object, that separation, are built into our language. Okay, so East, by East here I really do mean the Far East, the Orient. The characters are images, and they're processed whole. And so you have some difference right there in the contrast between the two. This is a passing metaphor, but I'm building it off the first thing to say, like cosmos and cosmology, we have this disjunction. How do we pull them together? Next. Okay, now, this is from the left side, so to speak, in the metaphor. And I'm wanting to show that there are people, cosmologists, who are looking to try to cross this bridge and thinking about this. Now, Joel Primack is an astrophysicist down at Santa Cruz, discovered dark energy, and his wife, Nancy Yellen Abrams, wrote an article, I think it was published in Nature, called Cosmology in the 21st Century, and they raised these questions. How many people recognize the possibility of a sacred relationship between the way the expanding universe operates and the way human beings ought to behave? How can we develop a planetary wisdom now that we are a planetary power? What is the role of the human in planetary evolution? So that's coming from the left side.
Do you have an idea when this was?
You know, I'll find that for you. I've had this for a while, so would it be, you know, it could be around 2000, but I can give it, if you give me your email, I have it, and I should have put it there. It's a while back, after 2000, I think. Okay, next. Now, going over to the other side. Feng Yulan Feng, depending on which side of the ocean you're on, which hemisphere, published really the first, in Chinese, the first major history of China, 1929, I think it was. And it had a big impact in China. I mean, it had a big impact on Chinese thought to have this all brought together, very highly regarded there. And in the 50s, when it was translated into English, it was and continues to be a premier source of the history of Chinese philosophy. Okay, so now this is what he's saying from the other perspective. Chinese philosophers, for the most part, have not regarded knowledge as something valuable in itself, and so have not sought knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Even in the case of knowledge of a practical sort that might have a direct bearing upon human happiness, Chinese philosophers have preferred to apply this knowledge to actual conduct that would lead directly to this happiness, rather than to hold what they consider to be empty discussions about it. Now, throughout here, I'm talking about traditional Chinese philosophy as it comes to us from, well, certainly from the time of Confucius, is particularly focused on Confucian philosophy. So here you have the other side. Next is a continuation of this, or another selection from this. A very important feature of modern Western history has been the consciousness by the ego of itself. Once it has consciousness of itself, the world immediately becomes separated into two, the ego and the non-ego, or what is subjective and what is objective. From this division arises the problem of how the subjective ego can have knowledge of the objective non-ego. And from this arises the great emphasis which Western philosophy has laid upon epistemology. In Chinese thought, however, there has been no clear consciousness by the ego of itself, And so there has been equally little attention paid to the division between the ego and the non-ego. Therefore, epistemology has likewise not become a major problem. Again, we're just looking at this from two different sides here. And next one, please. Okay, now there's this obscure philosopher that you probably never have heard of who dabbles in the occult arts. Richard Tarnas, in his book Cosmos and Psyche, which many of you have read, is describing the forging of this autonomous self in the West during the modern period, which made possible in his words, a new freedom from externally imposed meanings and orders that had previously been seen as embedded in the cosmos and upheld and enforced by traditional structures of cultural authority. But, he adds, that this freedom was attained at a great cost, the disenchantment of the cosmos. Okay, here's his direct quote. Disenchantment, the denial of intrinsic meaning and purpose, essentially objectifies the world and thereby denies subjectivity to the world. And if you've taken his classes, you'll remember the circles. You know all the circles, so I don't tell you that, but anyway, I won't go into that. I mean, he does it beautifully. And it's in Psyche and Cosmos, I think, all of those diagrams. It's very valuable to read. Objectification, did I say this already? Denies to the world any capacity to intend, to signify intelligently, to express its meaning, to embody and communicate humanly relevant purposes and values. To objectify the world is to remove from it all subjective categories, such as meaning and purpose, by perceiving these as projections of what are now regarded as the only true subjects, human beings. So subjectivity is strictly something inside of the human. It's not attributed to the world. It's not attributed to the cosmos, which thereby is fairly empty and meaningless. Okay, next. Now, Thomas Berry echoes this idea. Thomas Berry says, we gave away our subjectivity, our very souls, to the objective, reasoning mind. You might say we conspired in our own diminishment in agreeing to live a divided life when interiority or subjectivity got lost in the process of progress. Now, it's assumed in all of this that the importance of the left brain and reasoning processes and so on are the source of the brilliant work we've been able to do in Western science and Western philosophy. So this in no way is to discount that. The question is, how do we revive the colossal corpse? Somehow bring these together. Okay. You see Thomas Berry, someone else from this other side who's thinking this through. How do we do this? Next, we might be back. Okay. Then this is from Thomas Berry and Brian Swim's The Universe Story. Scientific language, however useful in scientific investigation, can be harmful to the total human process once it is accepted as the only way to speak about the true reality of things. A more subjective language is needed to understand the subjective depth of things. Poetry would be one mode. To understand both the qualitative differences and the multivalent aspects of every reality. And of course, Brian is also a cosmologist, and everyone knows here the project that he's undertaken and undertook with Thomas Berry to expand this whole concept. Next. I think we're back in China now. Okay. Now, you don't have to take all of this in, but I want to give a rough timeline so you know where we're going and when, so to speak. I'm going to be talking about Confucianism, but the Confucian classics. And one of them that people little realize is a Confucian classic is the Dachuan, which is the Confucius commentary on the I Ching. So out of the I Ching really comes our first view in China of a cosmology. Now, Yi Wu, when I mentioned to him that I wanted to write my dissertation on cosmology, he said, no cosmology in Chinese philosophy. And I said, it ruined my day. I had it. You know how hard it is to get your dissertation topic down? And there it was. And so then he talked on it afterwards. I wish I had his comments. They were very good. But again, if you're not looking at it over a clipboard, then you don't have a cosmology. You're in it. It's not something you're asking about. But I'm using the word simply because here we are. Okay, so Fuxi, I'm touching here on the traditional sages of the I Ching, and in fact, the ancient Chinese sages, who are really an extraordinary bunch, really amazing to read. But Fuxi, who is really a legendary character, he not only invented, or is credited with inventing the I Ching or the trigram system, but he's really the culture hero. He's responsible mythically for the beginning of all Chinese culture. And his dates, legendary dates, are given as around 2500, 2300 BC, sometimes even later. So that still does suggest an early inception of something. Okay, now after, we are more certain about Yao and Shun, who are the first sage kings. You'll meet Yao in a few moments. And this is very important because, again, the culture begins, this is very old. Look how old, what are we talking about here, 4,000 years back. The sageliness is the value instilled in that society already, and we'll find out more about that. Okay, so the first, Fuxi is credited as the first I Ching sage. King Wen, around 1100, 1000 BC, is definitely a historical character. We can start dating these people against eclipses later on, so we're more certain of these dates. And then his son, the Duke of Zhou. King Wen gives the judgment, the statements, the first words that go with the figures, and the Duke of Zhou, his son, gives the line statements, if you're familiar with the I Ching. Okay, now we come up to where we're going to be working here, which is the time of Confucius, famous axial age, same time as Buddha, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and possibly Lao Tzu. We really don't know the timing of Lao Tzu. There is an apocryphal, probably apocryphal story that Confucius met Lao Tzu. Okay, and then 1000 AD, we have the Neo-Confucian sages, who are another really very fine group of thinkers. And they have been challenged by the introduction in the first century of Buddhism into China, which sends Confucianism more or less into eclipse. So it has its renaissance around 1000 AD with these wonderful thinkers. You don't have to remember any of this. I'm just trying to give you a placement of what we're going to be talking about. Okay. Now, and you may have seen in there, I forgot to point it out, but there's what they call the three dynasty period, which was the Shah, the Shang, and the Zhou. Three great dynasties when these sage kings lived and so on. And for a long time, the Shah and the Shang were thought to be mythological. But, oh joy of archaeology, in, oh gosh, when was it? No, in 1899, the first oracle bones were discovered at a site in Anyang. And then in the 30s, they really began to excavate. And it's just an enormous treasure trove of beautiful things, including thousands of these, the scapulars, these were used with divination along with turtle shells, the scapulars of oxes. You see these are even inscribed here. Okay, this, yeah, there's several things in here, so you might hold on there. Okay, now, but wait until I give you the signal, just so people can take it in without getting too overwhelmed. Okay, now, this is important for later. So this part, you might keep somewhat in your mind. In these inscriptions from the Shang dynasty, the act of the ancestors in meeting the gods was called pin or bin. I have mixed up here a little the Wei Giles and the pinyin because of different sources, but bin. Dead ancestors were often, dead ancestors were often seen in the records of the kings, the pin shang ti, in the course of which the king's requests from the profane world were turned over to the supreme being. The single word, bin, seems to embrace ideas of prayer, divination, reception, and petition. We're going to meet this word again. Okay, next. In every case, it must be seen as an act of opening up between heaven and earth by the person of the sage or king. So we're talking about an opening. This is important. Okay, next. Through the instrument of the oracle or the ancestor, usually within the sacred precinct of the temple, the sage penetrates the world of heaven. Okay, next. This would seem to extend also to the actual task of taking astronomical measurements of the heavens necessary to making adjustments to the calendar. So this was also going on. The emperors would send people to the four corners of the world to take measurements of the stars and make adjustments And this is how they're able to keep very long and detailed astronomical records. Okay? Nope. Oh, wasn't there something else there? Nope, I guess not. All right, just quickly, these are divination methods coined during the, yarrow stalks during the Zhou dynasty. Coins come in around the 12th century. Okay, we can skip that. This is just a list of what are called the 10 wings, which are the commentaries attributed traditionally to Confucius, although they're now considered to have come later. But they are commentaries on the I Ching that come about between the 6th and 3rd centuries. And we're going to be drawing mainly on the 5th and 6th, the Dutch one. Okay. Now, gosh, I thought I had made this a little easier to read. I guess I didn't. Okay, I'm going to go through this slowly because this is so beautiful and so important. In ancient times, the holy sages made the Book of Changes thus. They invented the Yarrowstalk oracle in order to lend aid in a mysterious way to the light of the gods. This is a participatory universe we've got here. The human has a very important, almost a mysterious role in this. And how did they do this? They put themselves in accord with Tao, and we'll define that in a moment here, but the way of the universe, really, and its power, which is the virtue, Tao Te Ching, and in conformity with this, lay down the order of what is right. Now that's, if you think about that, that's quite an amazing process. First of all, they feel that important that if they do this, they're lending aid in a mysterious way to something cosmic, and they put themselves in accord with the natural way of the universe, the natural way of things, the natural way of the self. And in conformity with this, they lay down the order of what is right. So they pulled it out of the inside. Okay, now, here's the part I really like. By thinking through the order of the outer world to the end, and by exploring the law of their nature to the deepest core, they arrived at an understanding of destiny. There's no separation here between subjective and objective. They studied the inside as much as they studied the outside. And through the study of both of these, they come to an understanding of destiny, cosmic destiny, natural destiny, personal. Okay? Next. Okay, this is the one I guess okay, I think, well, we can go through this. It's a little of what it's a repetition from a different wing of what I've said. This is how Fuxi came to his wisdom and invented the I Ching, looking upward and contemplating the images of the heavens, astronomy, astrophysics. Next. Then he contemplated the markings of birds and beasts and the adaptations to the regions. So he's studying the heavens, he's studying the earth, he's studying the creatures, okay? He proceeded directly from himself and indirectly from objects. Thus he invented the 8 trigrams in order, again, to enter into connection with the virtues of the light of the gods and to regulate the conditions of all beings. Okay, next. Now we're going to meet Yao. Yao is the one who was the first emperor, legendary, but still this all comes from the Book of History, which is about 8th century BC. Emperor Yao will become almost to be celebrated like we celebrate President's Day now. He becomes so important that children learn about him in kindergarten. Okay, so here's this description of him. I said he becomes a pattern for the Chinese people of an enlightened and virtuous ruler who studied the ways of heaven and earth and used his observations to improve and bring order to their lives. So everything we've just talked about the role of the ancient sages, is really being embodied in this emperor. And here are the dates given there, 2357 to 2256. It's going a long way back. And I just love these descriptions. This is a late translation. Examining into antiquity, we find that the Emperor Yao was reverential, intelligent, accomplished, and thoughtful naturally and without effort. I love that. The display of these qualities reached to the 4 extremities of the empire and extended from earth to heaven. He was able to make the capable and virtuous distinguished, and thence proceeded to the love of the 9 classes of his kindred, who all became harmonious. He also regulated and polished the people of his domain, I like that, who all became brightly intelligent. Finally, he united and harmonized the myriad states of the empire, and lo, the black-haired people were transformed. The result was universal concord. This is a description of cosmology and cosmos, embodied in a human being. And one thing I love about this is that this is a legendary hero that is not famous for winning battles, not famous for great, incredible deeds. He's remembered for these thousands of years because of his character and the impact that character had on his people. Okay, I have something else in there, I think. Next. Oh, I love this part. He's also sent his people out to the four directions, his brothers supposedly, to take all these measurements. Thereupon, Yao commanded Shi and He, in reverent accordance with their observation of the wide heavens, to calculate and delineate the movement and appearances of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the zodiacal spaces, and so to deliver respectfully the seasons to the people. I mean, how lovely. He separately commanded the second brother, Shi, to reside in Yu, in what was called the Bright Valley, and there respectfully to receive as a guest the rising sun, and to adjust and arrange the labors of the spring. And this receive as a guest is also been opening up, but on the receptive side. The emperor said, go and be reverent. In the last year before Thomas Barry died, I went to visit him and shared a little of this with him to thank him. And I said, Thomas, Yao was the first cosmologist. Because what I didn't say, I'm sorry, and it should have been the introduction here, is that Thomas studied all these texts in the original. He went to China in 1948 to teach, but also to learn Chinese language and culture. He had to leave in 49 because of the revolution. But then he went on to study Chinese and to teach Chinese philosophy and to write about it. And so I should have said that before. His capacity to, I mean, when I said to him, yeah, I was the first cosmologist, and he nodded and smiled and said, yes, okay. Next. Okay, I'm going to borrow now from Lao Tzu, even though we can't place him on the map here. There's no one who speaks more eloquently, as you all probably know, about the Tao and his Tao Te Ching. And so here's how he defines it. He says, there was something formed in chaos. It existed before heaven and earth, still and solitary. It alone stands without change. It is all pervasive without being exhausted. I do not know its name, but name it Tao, the way. Okay, next. Now, short little Chinese lesson. Okay, the character for one is pronounced yi, and it's a straight line. This little thing here is just because the straight line was made with a calligraphic pen, presumably. Pen, excuse me. Its philosophical definition is the essence, the practice, and the function of the way. Next. In this context, yi is not a noun, but a verb, not an object, but a process. For this reason, I like to think of it as wanting. Okay. Now, this is from another Confucian classic. We've jumped up in time, as you remember, so these classics are attributed to Confucius. There's some debate about that among scholars, but it's pretty much thought that the grandson of Confucius wrote the Doctrine of the Mean based on his grandfather's teaching. Okay, the way Tao of heaven and earth may be completely declared in one sentence. They are without doubleness, and so produce things in a manner that is unfathomable. Without doubleness, very important, without doubleness. Okay, next. Now here's the description in the Great Treatise in, I actually think it's part 2, chapter 11, maybe I've forgotten. Anyway, of the description of what's going to become, what will become the lines of the I Ching, or the process behind it. It says, therefore there is in the changes, and Yi Jing means the book Jing of changes, Yi. And it's very interesting that it's the same word for one and the same word for change. I mean, that happens, but I think it's important here. There is, in the changes, the great primal beginning, Tai Chi. Now this is the first appearance of the phrase Tai Chi in any Chinese text. The actual practice of Tai Chi Chuan is waiting till the 12th century to come about. This figure is also from the 12th century. I only put it here because it is called the Tai Chi symbol, and because it shows this interrelationship between yin and yang. This brings forth the two primary forces, the two modes. Now, those forces are yin and yang, but in the I Ching, they're the first and second hexagram for heaven and earth, Qian and Kun, okay, which are respectively the creative and the receptive. Next. Okay, now you're going to see the most economical shorthand you've ever seen for a cosmological description. A yang line in the I Ching is a solid line. And yang is associated with heat, light, firmness, and it's active. There are other things along the way, but these are the basic qualities. Yin is associated with cold, dark, yielding, still. Again, this is a much later figure, but you see how they interplay. I'll tell another very short Yuwu story. We were taking a class from him. We were using his book, Chinese Philosophical Terms. And one of the students in class one day said, "You know, Dr. Wu, in all these Chinese philosophical terms, you don't have yin or yang." And he said, "I only have no compound words in this book, only single words." Another person spoke up and said, "Yes, but yin and yang." And he laughed and he said, "No yin, no yang, yin-yang compound word." Very important, very important. Okay, and that's what this figure is meant to indicate too. Next, please. Now, we're going to do this slowly and keep your finger handy because this, don't go ahead. Cheat, don't peek. Okay, I love this. That which lets now the dark, now the light appear is called Tao. That's from the Dutch one. Okay, now we begin, it's said that, we begin with Tai Chi, then we have the two modes, then we come to 4 images. Okay, which are just, you'll see later, just 2 lines. Now, let's do the first one, please. Oh, this is a pity. Can you see these up here? You can't see those. What a shame. I don't know why it seems so faded. They're the 2 yin lines.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Yeah, right? There. 2 yin lines. Okay, so we have 1 yin line. It's doubled, which means it increases the darkness, it increases the cold, it increases the inactivity, and so we have winter. And if this picture came out better, I don't know why it hasn't really, but if the picture came out better, you'd be seeing a frozen landscape. Okay, now the next one, please. You still can't see this. What we have here is a yin line on top. Oh, thank you, that may help. Does that help anybody?
Yes.
Okay, what you see on the top is the yin line, below that a yang line. Now in the Chinese tradition of this, everything comes up from the bottom of the hexagram. So one yin line has left, and now a yang line has come underneath it, which is an increase in warmth, an increase in light, an increase in activity, spring. Okay, next one. I'm sorry, I don't know why these are faded like this. Then the yin line leaves, we have another yang line come up, we have 2 yang lines. And what is that? It's an increase in warmth, it's an increase in light, it's an increase in activity to its fullest. So this would be like the summer solstice, this would be like the winter solstice, the equinox. Next one. Next one. Okay, this is a yin line coming up underneath the yang line. So now we have, after summer, we begin to have an increase in darkness, we begin to have an increase in cold, we begin to have an increase in inactivity. This is just a description of one way in which these are applied, but I think you can get a real feeling for the power of those images. Okay, next, thank you. Now, I created this, I created this scheme, this graphic, to show you how they're related. And it's really funny, I don't know why, but these are supposed to be connected. They're little lines, I'll have to darken those, I guess, to connect those.
The lamp, I think, in here is...
Change the contrast.
The lamp is fried, that's why, in the projector. So.
Okay.
Sorry about
Well,
that.
it seems to be doing quite a good job, actually. It's right. Okay. So, again, this is taken from the Dutch one. What we just read, beginning with Tai Chi, which gives rise to, it doesn't mean it gives rise to the 2 modes, that give rise to the 4 images, that's good, and that give rise to the 8 trigrams. Now, the 8 trigrams, as you see, become characterized for all of these elements of nature. Well, earth, up to heaven, and all of these elements in between of nature. And the hexagrams, are 64 hexagrams in the I Ching. And those 64 hexagrams are made of every possible combination of these 8 trigrams. And it's interesting, people have drawn this parallel, I mean, it's just mysterious, but you know, there are 64 codons in the DNA. And I gave this talk, a different talk once, but it was about some of this material, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, why did they stop at 64? I said, I don't know, why don't we stop at 64 codons? But here we all are with just those. And that's also made up of 3, was adenine, guanine, and thymine, something like that. I'm not drawing a parallel, I'm just saying that these 8 trigrams and the 64 hexagrams were felt to be able to display all the 10,000 things, everything. Okay, next, please. Here they all are in their received sequence. You can see now these are hexagrams. They're in no particular order in the I Ching, and I think that's intentional because it's meant to be, they're meant to be random, and you query it, and it's a synchronicity between the moment that you make your inquiry, between what the response is and what's going on in the world at the time. I mean, that's what the oracular moment is. So it's not meant to be in order. It's a right brain, not a linear sequential. Okay, but here's what I'd like you to imagine in your minds. Look at, I didn't make a thing for this, but imagine the table of elements in the West. The table of elements was really represented the Western quest to find the building blocks of nature, the smallest thing of matter, not of nature, of matter. Find the smallest units of matter. That was the quest. That's what it expressed. We've gone a long way with that. This is really the other side. These are units of change. That's what interested them. That's what the sages were looking at. Units of change. And in one description, a hexagram is 6 empty spaces, just 6 empty spaces through which the yin and yang rise and fall. Okay, next please. Okay, another rather neat thing they did with this in the Han Dynasty, this was later, this is 200 BC, 200 AD. How many people here are familiar with the I Ching in some way or another? Oh, that's good, that's good. Okay, because if you're using the Wilhelm I Ching, especially, or any really rather complete I Ching, you'll see, they'll say, oh, this is the hexagram for the 3rd month, or this is the hexagram for the 6th month. And years ago, I wondered what they were talking about, and when I wrote them all out, I actually figured this out just sitting around fooling around with it. Then I later found out it was written down somewhere, but it took me a long time. This is how they come out. And if you look at this and think that yang represents light, everything we've been talking about, you're really looking at the journey of the light through the year. You see that? And then how it recedes. So it begins, these are the equinoxes, and then you have the solstices and so on. And of course the matching hexagrams for the 2. Next, please. Wow. Neat, isn't that neat? Okay, now Xiao Yun is someone I'm very fond of. He's a Neo-Confucian philosopher around 11th century, 12th century maybe, 1100s. And he was a mathematician, a philosopher, and a cosmologist. And he did something very interesting. I wish I had the one, I should have put this other one in between. But if you looked at how those 8 trigrams are made, I did sit and spend a whole day trying to figure this thing out too, how he did this. What happened is you've got the yin and the yang, or whichever way they were. Okay, then you double each one and put a yin and yang line on top of it, up to the trigrams, you see? And you keep doing that. Now you won't see this in here, but I'll tell you what happens with it. I'm sorry I didn't put that up there, but he kept doing that past just the trigram. And I did that too, up to 6, up to the 6th level, where I kept taking and doubling so I took even the trigrams, doubled each one, put a yang and yin line, and so on. And you end up with this long line of 64 hexagrams. It's not the same as the order of the received hexagrams. It's like this, only first, this is, I ended up with a big long line, and Xiao Yung ended up with a big long line. And the order he had them in, he took this next incredible step. He took that line and he connected it as a circle. And so he ended up with heaven, Shen on top, and earth below, and so on. The quote from him, he said, unite them and they make one, spread them out and they make 10,000. Okay, now, I don't know if this, I'll touch on this later, maybe in a better way. But if you see how this works in 2 directions, remember, Chen is the creative. So you have the creative that moves around and it's, it comes back to that all yin character of the receptive, and then it goes back and comes back up again to the creative. So I describe this as wanting first of the creation of the 10,000 things, and then wanting is a return to the root and the supreme ultimate, and then back to the creativity. You don't need to worry about this. I'll repeat this again in another way. But I do want you to keep this in mind, what Xiaoyong did. The next one, please. Because is it 17th century for Leibniz? I think it's 17th century.
Yeah.
Okay. Leibniz had just invented the binary system. And I imagine I should think he was proud of himself. I would be if I had come up with a binary system, even today. And he even made a prototype of a computer. This is out of wood, but he used the binary system to do that. And during this period, he received a letter from a friend of his who was a missionary in China. And the missionary sent him Xiaoyong's, I don't know if he sent him the circular one I showed you or had them all laid out. It's the same progression. And Leibniz looked at that and he realized that if you replaced the broken line with a 0 and the straight line with a 1, maybe it's reversed, it was perfect counting, 0 to 63 or 1 to 64 in a binary system. So he was thrilled by that. Okay, next. Now, in 1974, Scientific American came out, as you see, with a cover story about the I Ching and about this discovery that Leibniz made and about Xiaoyong, the story I've just told you. And of course, even, I think it was Martin Gardner who wrote the article, and he was saying, can you imagine that someone back in the 12th century had come up with this? But all that Xiaoyong was doing was using the chapter 111 from the I Ching, 3rd century BC, and making it into a schematic form and taking it a next step. Okay, next please. Okay, now, I wish you could see this better. Do you remember this from before when you could see it better? Or can you see it at all? Okay, because here you have Tai Chi, which, I don't know if I said this, Tai Chi means the supreme ultimate, the furthest extent. So it's like the furthest extent of a field in which nothing has arisen yet. Behind this, I think of Tao, because Tao has no name or form at all, but Tai Chi is the beginning. Okay. Then we had the yang and yin lines, so you have the 2 modes, that's all they're called, the 2 modes, the 4 images, and the 8 trigrams. Okay, and so this is the way, this is a creation story, but it's not like a Big Bang. It's a creation story of how everything comes into being, in every second, in every moment, everything. That's what to me is similar to Whitehead in certain ways. Okay, so this is happening all the time. So, you go from here to the 64 hexagrams and the 10,000 things. Now, when I say it's a creation story, that's only my comment. That's not how it's regarded traditionally, and so it's just a kind of editorial comment on my part. But you can see why it is like that. Okay, so from this you can get all the conditions under heaven, the 10,000 things. Creative action, call this here. But the sage could do something called fan reversal. The sage could do that, but then he can come back through penetration, through meditation, through contemplation, and come back down through all of this to the one, to Tao. That was one of the things that characterized a sage. Next, please. Okay, you can do the first line. This is going to be a line-by-liner. Okay, now this is a beautiful thing summarizing the idea of this, I feel, by another Neo-Confucian philosopher of around the 11th century, Sheri. He says, all the Li, the principles and patterns under heaven, have always been one, but the one cannot be held fast. Next. This is why the sages made it clear that the yin and yang and variation and transformation originally came from one, but through interaction arrive at the infinite Li. Next, please. Now, as for coming forth from one, but reaching the infinite, when people observe this, they think there are infinite differences. Next. How many are the next? Okay. But when the sages observe this, wherever they go, it is one. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, next please. Okay. Thomas Berry. Now you're going to hear these echoes in Thomas Berry. I see the earth in its living forms and human understanding as the most profound expression of the universe. Next, please. The universe itself is primary in every attribute. Next. It is one, it is diverse, it is coherent. You can see the echo of that idea. Okay, next. By coherence, I mean the integrity of a pattern in which every created entity is in relationship to, next. What happened to that now? Yeah, to every other one. So there's a single but diversified universe, and the understanding of the diversity and the coherence is the basic way of entering cosmology. So we're coming together. Next, please. In fact, there might be another line. I would say that such an understanding is the basis of religion, but it is not itself religion. Interesting comment from Thomas Berry. If you think back to the schema that I showed you, when I put that Tai Chi down there, or Tao, or whatever, my feeling is we need a placeholder for that in some form or another. And whatever that placeholder is, it's prior to even religion, which then moves off that, and that's already a diversification. We sort of need a placeholder out of which things come by whatever name we call it. Okay, next, please. Now, Chinese character for two, we're counting very slowly here. Here it is, it doubles the character for one. It expresses the two realms, heaven and earth, each with its own process of wanting. The Dachuan says, in heaven the images are completing, on earth the forms are completing. Now, and I add, completing is wanting, the individual natures. Okay, next please. This is from the 10 Wings. Okay. Now, the Tao, the way, Tao means way, of the creative works through change and transformation, so that each thing receives its true nature and identity and comes into permanent accord, becomes permanently attuned with the great harmony. And I put the word cosmos there. This is what furthers and perseveres. This is the one with all the young minds. And the next, which is the receptive, the description of it in the 10 Wings is the receptive in its riches carries all things. Its nature is in harmony with the boundless. It embraces everything in its breadth, and illumines everything in its greatness. Through all individual beings can attain success or prosper. And there's a beautiful line on this first, I think it's actually associated with the first one, that says, success is the coming together of all that is beautiful. Whoa, that would change things. That'd be something. Okay. Oh yeah, I put it there. There we go. Next, please. Okay. Now, but the two realms, heaven and earth, must themselves be integrated for the higher wanting to complete itself. Next. So there are three, and this is the character for three. The third is the realm of the human. It has been added not above or below, but between. It's the one in the central position, and it is nevertheless regarded as one of the three powers, qis, the qi of Tai Chi, which is not energy. It's like ultimates. And the human is one of them. rising between those two. Okay, next please. Now, here we have the trigrams. Here's the trigram for earth, the trigram for heaven, and that is a hexagram. Together, they're a hexagram. But the threefold way of describing this in this same text makes the human up of the lowest line of heaven and the highest line of earth. So the human is where they meet, and the human is the anvil where the opposites come into connection. And human life, human expression, human emotion, human passion, everything it is to be human is exactly what's necessary in this system to bring them together. Next. Okay. Thomas Berry nails this so beautifully. I mean, I had studied all these things before I knew that Thomas Berry had written these things on this Chinese material. And I've been working with these characters. All this material I was doing before I came upon Thomas's material on this, and I thought, holy mackerel, he just nails this. The Chinese have a definition of the human as the heart line of heaven and earth. Thus, the human is the understanding heart of heaven and earth. The phrase has also been translated as the human is the heart of the universe. We are the consciousness of the world, or the psyche of the universe. Okay. It's beautiful, isn't it? Okay. Now, this is back from the 8th wing of the Book of Dangers, and they're talking about, again, these ancient sages who created the I Ching, and they said their purpose was to follow the order of their nature and of fate. We saw that in the beginning. Therefore, they determined the Tao of heaven and called it, and here it's the two top lines, and called it the dark and the light. They determined the Tao of the earth, and they called it the yielding and the firm. They determined the Tao of man and called it love and rectitude. That reminds me just a little bit of the two pillars of Solomon's temple, Yakin and Boaz, justice and mercy. But here this is the meaning of those terms. Next, please. Now, again, working with these three realms. The word for King Wang was made up of the character for three. And think back to Yao, which this comes from in part. To this is added a vertical line for the upright figure of the human capable of uniting the three realms in his person. Okay, next please. Oh, now, but there's another way these three come together. And this is really important. This is the most important concept of Chinese philosophy, Chinese thought, Chinese culture. See, there are the two. But the third one is the human. So the human is holding together those two realms in his person. And the earliest Chinese dictionary states simply that run means to love each other, and adds that it is the benevolence that must link each person, this is a person, with his neighbor. Thus, mutuality, reciprocity, humaneness. Next, please. Okay, I threw this, I don't know why I put this in here. This was a wonderful, wonderful teacher, professor of mine. And he used to say, because this is an oracle, although it's also a philosophy, it came down two streams in our present time, but he used to say, all of life is oracular, the universe is constantly disclosing itself. I think that's such a beautiful line, every small thing. I keep looking at Mary at that moment, thinking of the poems that have come into you, all these disclosures from nature, so beautiful. Okay, so in ancient times, remember, the people were said to bin shanti, opening up to receive counsel from heaven or through prayers. The Emperor Yao sent his brother to receive as a guest, using the word is again, bin, the morning sun. Now we come to Confucius, and Confucius defines this character we've been talking about, Run, and he says, it is, when you go abroad, to behave to everyone as if you were receiving a great guest, the same way you receive the morning sun. To employ the people as if you were assisting at a great sacrifice, and not to do to others what you would not wish done to yourself. We're back to Feng Yulan. He said, most Chinese philosophic schools have taught the way of what is called the inner sage and outer king. The inner sage is a person who has established virtue in himself. The outer king is one who has accomplished great deeds in the world. The highest ideal for a man is to at once possess the virtue of a sage and the accomplishment of a ruler, and so become what is called sage king, or what Plato would term the philosopher king. Next. Now, where does this come from? Okay. Oh, our next character.
It's missing it.
Oh, no. Oh. There's no way to do anything to contrast or anything like that?
No, everyone can see it on the
Yeah,
screen.
you can see.
You can see
Yeah,
it?
We can see it on
computer
here on the
screen.
computer.
Oh, behold, can you all see this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Use your-
This is really important. You promise you can see it?
Yes.
Because this won't make any sense
Promise,
otherwise.
we'll sign.
Cross your heart.
We do.
Okay. This character is made up of, I said the way of heaven and earth made complete, this without doubleness. Okay. The bottom part of the character on the lower right is the character for heart or heart-mind. They're the same in Chinese, heart and mind, okay? Above that, you'll see the single line. And that single line is the one that we've been talking about throughout. Above that, you'll see the rectangle with the lines. Okay. That's a character for eyes on its side, and on top of that is the glyph for 10. And an early interpretation of this character when it first came about was that before a plumb line, they get 5 people together to look at something they were building, their house. And if 10 eyes had seen it and called it straight, it was straight. Okay? So, and then on the left, you'll see the radical for walking. You see that on the left-hand side. Okay. And it usually means something in action. So my literal translation of this character is straight-heartedness, single-heartedness, single-mindedness, in action before the world. Okay? And this is the character De of the Tao Te Ching. And it's been translated, it's most commonly translated, dictionaries and so on, as virtue. The inner force of one in action, the expression of wanting. Now what's so important about this is that it's a quality of the universe. We do not look at virtue and think of virtue as a quality of the universe. So Arthur Waley, when he translated this, and I can't remember what decade it was, but it was after the Victorian era, and I'm guessing because of the Victorian era, he didn't want to call it Tao and virtue, because it would just be limited and misunderstood. So he used the word power, and he called it the way in its power. But then later, after a couple of world wars, the word power wasn't that popular either. And neither one of them, as you can see, really fully expresses that. So you'll notice now that this book is almost always referred to as the Tao Te Ching. Nobody even tries to translate that. But so this is a very beautiful character. You know, emptiness, the virtue of emptiness. Okay. Next, please. Now, is there something there?
Same character.
Okay, picture the same character there. Okay. This is the most important thing in this one anyway. As the human increasingly senses both his or her natural course, Tao, and the larger course, the way of heaven, in which he or she is embedded, whether experienced in the inmost being or the external world, De rises as this force of virtue, which is both the singular flowering of the individual nature and the quality of the universe coming into being. And it's happening with everything. Everything. Isn't that beautiful? I'm so glad you like it as much as I do. Okay, next, please. Thomas Barry. I mean, does he nail it again or what? The small self of the individual completes itself in the great self of the universe. I mean, it's breathtaking. Okay. Okay, we have a real character here. Now, this, I'm going to show you that obviously Tao and De virtue are two of the most important concepts in Chinese philosophy. This is one that's less well known, but it fits with the other ones and is so important. It's called Chong, and it's made up, first of all, this is the character for completing or perfecting. One origin of this, I think Ezra Pound speaks of this, is that it may be like the harvesting hook, so it's like harvesting. So perfecting, completing, okay? I think when you hit it again, that's okay. And then on the left side, we have the glyph for speech. Hit it again, Sam. There we go, speech. Okay, now this character has the unfortunate translation in dictionaries of sincerity, but it's another quality of the universe. It's very difficult for us in English to imagine sincerity, sincerely yours, as a quality of the universe. So Thomas Berry, as you'll see, uses the translation of authenticity. Joseph Needham translates it as integrity, and I think those are the main ones. But I translate this in a literal way as the expression of completing and perfecting. And what is that? It's the manifestation of the whole universe. It is what existence is, right? So it's the expressing does complete it. Expressing is what completes it. Manifesting it is what completes it. Okay, next please. I think this is along the side. Ta-da. There, go ahead. Oh, okay, now go ahead. All right, this is from the Doctrine of the Mean again. Now we're going to go through this a little bit slowly because this is very powerful, especially when you have to think through sincerity more carefully. It is through sincerity or through authenticity, through this expression of completing, that the self, the individual nature, is completed and perfected. Next. Its Tao is that by which the human must direct himself or herself. Next. Without sincerity, authenticity, integrity, without this expression of completing, there would be nothing. If it's not expressed, if it isn't completed, it doesn't exist. There would be nothing. On this account, the self-cultivated human regards the attainment of authenticity as the most excellent thing. Okay? The possessor of authenticity, now I'm using Thomas Berry's word here, does not merely accomplish the self-completion of himself or herself. This is very interesting. Next. With this quality, he or she completes other people and things also, because everything's interconnected. So everything that a person is doing to perfect or complete himself or herself is also part of the whole process that's going on. The completing of oneself shows one's perfect virtue, as we've just described it, and the completing of other people and things shows one's knowledge. That means that as part of this expression, as each individual is doing this, the external activity is knowing the world, it's knowing other human beings, and the activity of that interaction is one's knowledge, but it is also part of the completing of the universe itself. Next, please. Both these virtues are virtues belonging to the nature, the individual human nature. Human comes into the world with these like a seed, whose flowering is exactly this. And this is the way in which a union is effected between the external and internal. This is how the objective and subjective come together. Beautiful. Therefore, whenever he and she, the entirely sincere, authentic person employs them, that is, these virtues, their action will be right. Okay, next. Just very quickly to see how many words get added to what's very, very simple in the text, and how simple Chinese, the language is, just to show this, the sincerity is that, we would have language, self completes. Complete people, benevolence, run, love, humanity. Complete things, knowledge. That's how it actually appears in Chinese. So simply, next, please. And here are the starry heavens. Okay. Okay. Oh, now this, we're going to go, this is the last major part. And it's here, from another Confucian classic, The Great Learning, that we see the import of all of these concepts on a society, on the kingdom. Okay. The way of great learning is Ming Ming De. Okay, now Ming is very important. This phrase appears in the I Ching, it appears in the Great Learning. Yi Wu says that of those two Mings, they both mean shine, radiance, brightness. The first brightness, and it's De, virtue, as we've seen it, that first comes on the inside. The first one's on the inside, and the second one's on the outside. So one description is to brighten, bright virtue. I've described it as to bear into the world, which is to evolve, and the literal meaning of evolve, the inner light of one's nature or virtue, of any person, of anything, of the cosmos itself. Next one. To bring the people into close and harmonious relationship. That's what Jun's all about, right? Okay? And to rest in the highest excellence. I've highlighted rest there because rest is so important in Chinese thought as it is not in our own thought. In this same thing, in the Great Learning, they cite back to the old Book of Odes with poetry, and a line from that, the master is saying, in the Book of Odes it says, the twittering yellow bird rests on the corner of a mound. When it rests, it knows where to rest. Should a man not be equal to the bird? Rest is so important. You rest in the highest excellence. You don't attain it. You're lifting your resting level higher and higher until you rest in the highest excellence. Okay, next. The resting point being known. The goal, this is, everything's backwards here. The resting point being known, the goal is then determined. So it isn't from frantic racing around to find the goal. You find your resting point. Find the resting point, then the goal is then determined. And that being determined, a calm composure may be attained to. Next, please. Such calmness brings tranquil repose. In such repose, there may be mindful deliberation. Such deliberation will bring an attainment of the desired end. Things have their root and their branches. Affairs have their end and their beginning. To know what is first and what is last will lead near to what is taught in the Great Learning. Next slide, please. Okay, now, this is a circular reasoning, completely antithetical to Western thought. I mean, you'd be thrown out of a philosophy class for coming up with something like this. But think how all this comes together and how this works. Okay, the ancients, wishing to illustrate illustrious virtue, this is a very awkward light translation. This is the same meaning that what I call bear the light of virtue into the world. First, ordered well their own states. But in order to do that, they first brought harmony within their families. But in order to do that, they first cultivated the persons. But before they could do that, they had to rectify their hearts. Well, before they rectified their hearts, they first had to be sincere. Now remember this bigger meaning of sincere. That would be that relationship with the deep nature and expression of that. Sincere in their thoughts. Wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended to the utmost their knowledge. So knowledge is still very, very important in this whole system. Okay? I don't know where we are. Okay. Their knowledge, things being investigated, their knowledge became complete, their knowledge being complete, their thoughts were sincere. As the thoughts become sincere, the hearts become rectified. As the hearts become rectified, the persons are becoming cultivated. As the persons are being cultivated, the families are being regulated. Their families being, I don't know if we want our families regulated now, but whatever that means, that was in there. Their families being regulated, their states were rightly governed. Their states being rightly governed, the whole kingdom was made tranquil and happy. Now this is something that I really love. From the Son of Heaven down, remember this is an ancient work, from the Son of Heaven down to the mass of the people, all must consider the cultivation of the person, the root of everything besides. There's the union again of the interior and the exterior. It cannot be, when the root is neglected, that what should spring from it will be well ordered. It never has been the case that what was of great importance has been slightly cared for. If you're a gardener, you know this. If you're an astronomer, you probably know this. If you're a mother, you know this. Okay. So, all right, now I just bring this up again, those questions that they ask. And I won't even try to answer these because I think if you think about it, you'll see how they have been answered. How many people recognize the possibility of a sacred relationship between the way the expanding universe out there operates and the way human beings over here ought to behave? Well, if the human is one of the three powers of the universe, there's not a question in saying that. How can we develop a planetary wisdom now that we are a planetary power? By assuming that position in some way that we saw, where the human expresses heaven and earth. What is the role of the human in the planetary evolution? Central. Central. Okay, next week. Okay, so now we come to Thomas Berry as he summarizes this material so beautifully again and brings it right up to date. An original endowment which requires development throughout the entire course of our human lives. The nature has only its root form until through the life development of a person it comes to proper fulfillment. The basic obligation of humans is to perfect their nature. When this is accomplished, we attain a complete interior spontaneity in our actions. That these actions accord with our nature, that they are spontaneous in the most profound sense of the word, that they are in harmony with all our social relationships. All this depends on the authentic, remember that word, character of our being. The entire Chinese civilization was centered on achieving this authenticity. The simplest thing in the world, it was yet the most difficult, the thing that we miss most often, although so obvious. Okay, in this context, the role of the individual human becomes especially significant. For the cosmic is not simply the dimension of humankind, it is the larger dimension of the individual human person. In this enlarged experience of the individual are all those qualities of the universe itself. While this exalted ideal of personal cosmic communion was thought of primarily as an experience of the sage kings of ancient times and of a few later sages, it was so deeply enshrined in the tradition as the basic human ideal that it became the encompassing context within which we saw most clearly the meaning of our existence and the cosmic function that we fulfill. So this answers those questions. I hope you're having time to sort of take this in. I don't want to erase it by this, so it's okay. Oh, this is the next slide? Now this is really an incredible line. The cosmos is encompassed in the human, and the human is encompassed in the cosmos. That's what happens if subject and object are no longer separated. Cosmos is encompassed in the human, and the human in the cosmos. Each discovers itself in the other. But the final concern is with the common bond of the truly real, which is found in the mutual attraction, je being a major part of that, which pervades the multiplicity of things and establishes this multiplicity as an ordered universe, as a cosmos. The highest ontological attraction of things to each other in the Confucian tradition can be indicated quite simply by the word communion. And I think this was written before the universe is not a collection of objects, it's a communion of subjects. But you can see, I mean, when you look at this all together, can't you see more deeply how that would function and what that means, a communion of subjects? Okay, next please. Okay, now I'm bringing it all home. This is the last slide.
PCC change. Oh,
Yeah. I thought we should bring it right back here. And these just appeared recently, and I thought they were so great. And I just wanted to end to say what an open thing this is, and what an engaged process this still is, and everybody's in the middle of it. Kenneth wrote, CIIS is a really exciting place for non-duality, which to me is again fundamental to representing the Eastern viewpoint. We should be careful not to lose ourselves in the external world and disregard the inner. see, this is an Eastern viewpoint. Then Hiroko Shiota wrote, "My learning in PCC has been a journey of making my own assumptions more conscious. The history and legacy of the West is impacting the whole world now. It is not irrelevant to my own life in Japan, for example. I feel very privileged to be able to strive for a more planetary perspective beyond the Eastern way of seeing and being in the world. East and West both are beautiful and meaningful as well as limited. And the more powerful perspective emerged when I have a broader vista over the planet, although it's still a beginning. I still don't know so many other human and non-human heritages and expression." So I'd like to just end on that open note. I think that's the last one, isn't it? So this is where I say thank you very much for your patience. If anyone has any questions, yes.
Well, first of all, you'd be happy to know I took a course, I Ching, Chinese Metaphysics and Cosmology with Professor Yu last semester, and he uses cosmology directly to refer to it.
Yes, I think he took that step. I think,
yeah.
But it was a hard one, and I still like to respect his earlier reticence. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, really fascinating. And one of the things it brought up, inevitably when we looked at it, is some of the cultural context around the I Ching and where it came from initially as, a very elite medium.
Yes.
For contact.
Emperors.
Yeah, to be a conduit, and then just kind of seeing it evolve through history, and then where we come to today, and particularly Confucianism, and then Neo-Confucianism, and there's a lot of different interpretations about patriarchy within those things, and to what level it shades, the way things are discussed, or the way human beings are even mentioned, or the various roles in society.
Right.
And so I guess my question, what I'm wondering about now is, and in your work with Thomas Berry, if you see an opening sort of democratization of the use of the I Ching, which is maybe a rhetorical question.
I think we are. I think we are we meaning the West, is the democratization of the use of the I Ching. It's really, years back I read somewhere that millions of copies that have been sold in the West. I mean, it was only translated in, I guess, in the 19th century. I think Legs was the first translation in English. And then you had the Wilhelm translation, which you worked with Yu, Wilhelm Baines, and then it just took off in Europe, France. Well, France is Europe, but Europe here. So I say that we're experiencing that in exactly that way. Now, you also have lots of different people who have interpreted this. I've been away from this material a little bit. I've got my books in my locker, but there was a woman, I think from CIIS, who did a book on like the feminist I Ching, and there were a lot of various permutations of it. And who was it? I don't know, was it you? I don't know where it came from, but I remember maybe something I was just thinking about, but none of it's wrong, because the I Ching doesn't have, that's the whole point of the I Ching. There's an oracular moment, and it's the present moment, and it's about change. And so nothing should be fixed. I mean, it comes very early, it comes through patriarchal cultures. There are things in there that you don't want to hear about when they describe them that way. But it's always subject to change. By the time King Wen was doing what he did, it had already been around 1,000 years. By the time Confucius is writing about it, it's been around, more than 1,000 years. So it changes, it should. One last thing, I didn't put it on here, but there's a character. The character, nobody has an I Ching here, I guess, but the character for change, the original one, was sometimes thought to be a chameleon. It looks like a lizard. And so I call it the Great Chameleon, because the one, it's one, I Ching. The interesting thing is I did a lecture on change.
Sheri, there's a pen there. Do you want to use the board?
I can't do it.
Okay.
I wish I could say I could just do that. It's actually in there, but I think you don't need to exactly see that. But just, it looks like a lizard. It's been described as a chameleon. And I did a lecture on change and transformation in the I Ching, and there are actually two completely different words that are change and transformation throughout the I Ching, with slightly different meaning, with different kinds of change. The word yi never appears in the I Ching, except I think what is easy to know. It has a second meaning of easy. It appears as easy. Why? Why does it never appear? It never appears because the one is the chameleon. It's one, and it is change. That is, it's one, it's the universe. It's exactly what Thomas Berry said about it. It's coherent. So it is change. It is one, and it is change itself. So anything goes. It's not a doctrine. Any other?
On that same note, it's funny because I'm learning it. I get more insight into the teaching sitting here with you than I have ever in my studies. And Euro, Western, white, female, you know.
I forgot to look in the mirror before I came in. I'm still.
That's
Haven't changed that
democratization
much.
of knowledge.
Right.
It's, you know, you are embodying a tradition that you're also recapitulating to your own culture in a way that
Oh, thank you.
has a significance.
Thank you. Couldn't be better. Thank you very much for that. But it is, of course, a lot of years with it and a lot of study of it, and it's very much also you. You know, we're so fortunate to have him here. I met someone from Beijing University at the last Whitehead conference, like 10 some more years ago, and they had just opened up again in mainland China to study the ancient classics. And so I said, well, if you come to San Francisco, I'll introduce you to my professor, Yi Wu. And he said, I mean, Wu Yi? Now, you would think there'd be 1,000 names like that, but anyway. And they said, yes, that's right. And he said, oh, he's very famous in China. I'm trying to get his books at the university, you know. So, because he has written translations and commentaries in Chinese. He still does his writing in Chinese. So that was very helpful. And I encourage anyone who has that opportunity to take advantage of that.
I haven't studied the I Ching very much before, but I learned a lot from your presentation. I'm struck by the resonances with Whitehead's thought.
I know. I'm glad you were.
Yeah, so
That's why I wanted you to hear it, so you could give me some ideas.
Yeah.
Yes, I do want to say this. Whitehead, and to tell you kind of where things are post-Cultural Revolution in China. I'm not completely up to date with today, but after 2000. First of all, Dewey, as Robert has talked about, Dewey had a great influence in China. He was very well received, his pragmatism. And then after that, it was Whitehead. The Chinese really embraced Whitehead. And obviously, well, first of all, what it resonated with is it's a philosophy of organism, which Western thought had not been. And this is called the philosophy of organism. So they immediately responded to that. Okay, now after the Cultural Revolution, in the present day, as I understand it, there are basically 3 strands primarily of thought in China today. Marxism is still there, obviously as the governing philosophy of the communist nation, but also the philosophy itself. And what's coming back is tradition, the traditional philosophy, especially Confucius. I'll tell you one more Yi Wu line that's related to that. We had taken Lao Tzu from him. You know, that my original major master's level was in Chinese philosophy. And it was just a great class. So we went to, now we had Confucianism. He sat there very quietly and he said, when I teach Lao Tzu, it's very internal. How people feel about it, that's their own business. But he said, when I teach Confucius, if their lives are not changed, I feel shame. Which I think is beautiful. But what that says to me is that there's still a big opening here for this. I mean, Lao Tzu has come, and Taoism has come, but Confucianism has an opening there, and it's coming back in China. There's a renaissance of traditional philosophy in general there. And what Xi Wang, whom I mentioned in the abstract there, says this is a Chinese, just a terrific Chinese man from China, a young man who got his PhD at Claremont in process studies, Whitehead studies. And he says, you know, there's Marxism there's traditional philosophy, and the third way is process studies in Whitehead, and that material that's the third way. So that, I mean, that's his view. He's a process studies person, but there are things that indicate that those are still important.
What you said about Confucianism reminds me there was once a cartoon in the New Yorker of 2 elderly Chinese gentlemen walking together with their Chinese hats.
Right.
And one says, as Confucius says, erroneously, of course.
But still. Yes. Allison, do you have a question?
I do kind of comment question. I want to talk about the Thomas Berry side.
Yes, please do.
Of your work.
Please do.
I've been reading and rereading and rereading Dream of the Earth for years with different groups of people. And I can sense Thomas's influences, but I don't know what they are. It's sort of like a secret code, like you know there's code language here. What does it mean, Thomas? And hearing this lecture this summer and now hearing it again, I feel so thankful that you've sort of started to break the code.
Oh my. Huh.
So when
It's
Thomas
interesting.
uses the word authenticity, as you spoke of here,
Yes.
I don't know if I've read any other philosophers who use the word, if Thomas is a philosopher, writers, who use the word authenticity in an ecological frame of mind.
Yes.
Thomas also uses the word courtesy, which is very important to him.
Very
And
Chinese.
there's another word here that I had. Well, spontaneous. You use that too, but
Yes.
spontaneous.
Yes.
So here, I mean, those words, of course, we have them in English, but now Thomas is using them, again, as a code back through time, back through
Yes.
successful human beingness, relation
Yes.
with the world.
Yes,
the world
yes.
that we inherited.
Yes.
It's all there. So it's maybe more of a comment, but
No, that's very helpful, and I think
I also want to
Yeah.
ask, why did you, what took you to Thomas? So you have this great study with Chinese philosophy,
right.
and then what tipped you to link to link Thomas with Chinese?
Well, the funny thing is that really, as I said, I did almost all my work for the dissertation, and I had read Dream of the Earth, and I knew Thomas's material. I read the story of the universe. I knew nothing. One day, Brian did say when Thomas had come to visit and taught the Paradiso class when we did Dante. Were you there for that? Oh, that was incredible. He said, well, we're going downstairs and people can ask questions of Thomas. And he took me aside and he said, well, he knows about Chinese philosophy. Why don't? But I didn't know what that meant, and I was too shy to ask anything. And honest truth is, no, wait a minute. Herman Green is the one who, when I visited in North Carolina, and he's a Whitehead person, he's a Thomas Berry person, when he knew that my studies were in Chinese, he had mimeograph sheets because these were articles. I don't think, I'm not sure what published material they're in, if they are still in something.
Riverdale, most of them are Riverdale.
They're just that's what he handed me, is Riverdale papers, because he taught this at Fordham for a while. And so suddenly I had these, and there's a whole paper on Zheng, there's a whole paper on authenticity, well, authenticity is Zheng, but on Run, on affectivity, and I was just, and then when they specifically asked me at this conference to talk, because Herman Green organized it, to speak on the influence of Chinese philosophy on Thomas Berry. And the honest truth is, in the last year, when I really went back again to those things, I was just jumping up and down, because I had been so excited about these characters completely on my own. And I read it, and not only had he been illuminated by the very same characters and the meaning and the depth of those, but he used his so particular talent and language to just express them so beautifully. And so one of the things, this material to me is important because when we're looking forward to the Echozoic era, he has ignited so much right through. I mean, you were talking about we had shelves that just had Thomas Berry's books here, all the people that he inspired and illuminated, who've gone off and done so many different things in so many fields, but one thing that's kind of left out, that to me is very important because it's more my field in a way, is this inner component of the outer work as a seamless thing. And you see it in these when he's talking about these characters in Chinese. But remember Carolyn Tobin was at the conference there, and I got her book, and they're just walking a conversation, the latter part of his life. some of these connections are made more there because it's informal. It's not philosophical material. But you know, I think it's very important to be able to see this process as something that begins in here and flowers outward. That's what it is. That's why it's organic. Everything's a seed in this model, and everything. I mean, the seed. What do you know what's inside the seed when you look at it? You don't know anything. It's nothing. Then the seed opens, it blooms, and it's outside. But it's all a seamless process, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, maybe not everyone knows this, but before he became an ecologist, he had written a book on the religions of India.
Yes.
Which was Hinduism, Buddhism, and yoga. He
Yep.
wrote a very, very fine book on Buddhism.
Yes.
And he had studied Eliade,
Right.
Jung,
Yes. He
Campbell.
knew Sanskrit as well as Chinese, right? Didn't he know Sanskrit?
I
Yes.
took a
You were
course in
you
Sanskrit
you
with
studied
him. Yeah,
Sanskrit with
right.
him.
At St. John, before he went to Fordham, he gave a course in Indian civilization, then Buddhist civilization, and then Chinese civilization.
Were you there?
I took all three.
Oh, man, I've always thought that was his high point. I mean, just reading about that. How wonderful. I mean, what he was doing at St. John's. Right after that. Not his high point, but I meant these.
For him, it wasn't a high point because he left it all.
Yeah,
And he went on to do ecology.
Yes.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that Allison's asking about this interior dimension.
Right.
Well, the interior dimension came from his life as a priest, and then these Eliade, Jung.
right.
The Buddhism book is very deep. I heard Professor Hakata say that when he read Thomas Berry's book on Buddhism, he cried. Hakata was a great scholar of Zen. So the other thing that some of you know, but some might not, is that from 1949 on, when he came back from China with Theodore de Bary, he and de Bary were the best of friends.
Yes.
De Bary was a world-famous
Yes.
Confucius scholar, head of the East Asian department at Columbia, and then provost at Columbia.
Right.
And they met regularly.
They met on the boat coming.
They did not meet on the boat.
Coming back from China, was
Right.
it?
Yeah.
Wow.
But there was a seminar that de Bary organized called
At
Oriental
Columbia, right?
Thought and Culture,
Yeah.
where these great Wing Sichan and people like that presented every month. It
Wow,
was very rich.
I would have loved to have been there.
And Thomas was in the thick of it.
Wow.
For a while, it looked like Thomas might get a position at Columbia, and then he didn't.
Can I ask you this? What period was this? Around what years was this? Did this seminar
The
take
various
place?
seminars,
Yeah.
they ran for 40 years, but I only went from, I went in the 70s and 80s.
Uh-huh.
Now, I came here in 1990, so
Wow.
I don't know what happened after that.
Right. Because I'm thinking this Alan Anderson that I quoted from, his field was Eastern philosophy, and he studied at Columbia, and I'm just wondering if he came through that program, because I first studied this material with him. Anyway, who knows?
No, but Mary Evelyn, of course, did worked with de Bary on Japanese Confucianism.
She worked with de Bary on that?
She
Wow.
yes. John studied with Thomas at Fordham, but Mary Evelyn
Right.
did a degree in East Asian studies with de Bary.
Now, someone had said that there's a new book out there, books coming out all the time. Mary Evelyn is bringing out some of the writings that weren't published before he died, but there are also collections coming out. And someone said the newest book out is really very good, and some think it's the best, whatever that
It's
is.
a collection of Thomas's ecological writings. It's in the
Spiritual
Maryknoll
Series, that's,
Orbis series
Orbis books.
of great
Have you read it?
spiritual
I have
writings.
it, yeah.
It's a very good book.
do you like it?
I do, yeah, and a lot of it's collection, so some of it you have it already, some of it's from places you don't have.
Right. Brian is
But it's
using
well
it
organized,
in
it's well
his
edited.
course. Right now, Brian's using it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to use it.
Do you remember the title of it, Bruce?
of Thomas Berry, Ecological Thinkers?
Something?
No, it's called like Thomas Berry's Selected Writings on the
Selected Writings,
American
that's right. It's got a green cover, I know, it's sitting on my,
Just
sitting
look
on my
on-
coffee table.
Look at the year. Go to Amazon and see what the newest one
I
is.
gave out like 7 of them
Is
for
that the
Christmas
green cover?
presents.
Did you really?
Yeah,
You need
yeah, it's
one.
a great gift.
True.
Yeah.
Well-
Well,
Very small.
I get bumped off my list this year.
There is a disadvantage. The
Yeah.
selections are very brief.
Very.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sometimes
are
3
they?
pages each.
Oh,
A
really?
few paragraphs
Oh,
sometimes.
well, that's.
Long
I
ones are
don't-
5 pages.
Yeah.
But they do they do bring the thoughts directly together. They do, you know, it's kind of like your pizza, you know, it takes the thoughts and puts them right together. So I think it's well edited, but it's never short.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
It's not in depth.
It's comprehensive and brief.
Well,
Survey.
Survey.
the Reenchantment of Science, is he in that book, do you know? The book, The Reenchantment of
No.
Science? I don't know if it's still around anyway. But this, Shihu Wang that I mentioned before, translated that, I think he's one translated into Chinese, and he lectures on it all over the place. And I mean, it's very, it's, when I say lectures on it, what's it? As he says, constructive postmodernism, which is related to all of this. Anyway, it's an aside, I guess. Drew.
Well, one thing I want to do is absolutely underscore what Allison said, because I had the same thought. You know, and I did see the presentation before, so but while tonight I was sitting here going like, wow, I'm even more understanding where Thomas Berry got some of his language and his ideas and his symbolism and et cetera, et cetera. And it's very, thank you for that. And it's very important, I think, to acknowledge that, you know, like, that Berry's, well, let me make one analogy that may seem a bit like a stretch, but, you know, they talk about all these MFA programs, that you have these Masters of Fine Arts programs, and people want to be writers, and they go on these MFA programs, and then you have, like, critics of it. And this one kind of critic in Poets and Writers magazine wrote a thing where they said, you know, number one, people criticize MFA programs because, you know, they just kind of have to crank out all this writing, and maybe it's not that good, but also, there's this idea that these people go from college to an MFA program. And it's like, and he's going like, number one, T.S. Eliot, you know, never went to a MFA program. You know, the great poets of the 20th century didn't have MFAs. And also, there's a sense where these people are like trying to write and be great writers, and they haven't studied history, and they haven't studied philosophy, and they haven't studied psychology, and they haven't studied religion. You see all this thing, you know, it's like, we need to, like, even if you just want to be a creative writer, why would you cut yourself off from all of that? So like I said, it's a bit of a wide analogy, but I just want to deeply honor, especially in the world that we live in where it's like, what's the next tweet and what's the next blog post, that when people really spend decades and decades, I love when I get a book that someone spent 20 years on.
Right.
And I'm just like, thank you so much.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
so
lovely.
there's just
Well
something like,
said.
you know, and I didn't quite, you know, your presentation has made me more aware of this, but I've also had other memories and or moments of recognizing how much went into what Thomas Berry wrote. And, you know, and Mary Evelyn makes a great point that he was, you know, don't give up on yourself. Thomas Berry's, the writings that he's known all around the world for, he did after he was 60 years old. You know, it's
Yes.
very interesting.
That's very hopeful.
But just the last thing I just want to say is that it's just, there's so much, I'm also beginning to notice, because having, you know, like the first time I read The Dream of the Earth, I might not have known all of the resonances that I now get when I see your presentation, but also I'm beginning to see, I've been looking, and I did a lot of research on the ecological period of like 68 through 74, you know, this type of thing for my dissertation. So I see, I mentioned this at the Chapel Hill conference, but it is interesting to see some of Berry's influences, you know, some of which I knew about, but some I hadn't noticed. I'm reading Alan Watts and I go like, oh, I see where Berry pulled that and reworded that, you know, or I'm reading René Dubos, you know, just you know, type of René Dubos type of thing. But it's just very, he had such depth, and I love how you pointed that out. And I'll just share one last anecdote as I close. When he went to Prescott College, when I brought him to Prescott College in the early 90s, there's this spiritual community called the Home Community that Lee Lazarevic was the guru of.
H-O-M-E, home?
Yeah,
Okay.
if any of you know Lee Lazarevic, you know, as this guru guy, teacher, but they're very into their Hinduism and they're in the Bowel tradition, and they are so obscure with their knowledge. But Berry, when they were stunned when Barry went in and his knowledge of all of the obscure Indian saints, that he was discoursing on, and they were just flabbergasted that he was just right there with them. So I just want to honor you and honor Thomas, that it's not like, it would be impressive, but like first time I read The Dream of the Earth, I was like, he's just coming up with all of this himself in an ecological context, but he spent 30, 40,
Yes.
50 years integrating, synthesizing, deepening, and then rewording, adding his own creativity and bringing all kinds of different things. But some of what you see these sentences where he's really just rewording some Asian wisdom at times in a very powerful way in an ecological and current context.
Definitely, and I know when I was first asked to speak on, quote, the influence of Chinese philosophy on Thomas Barry, my first thought was, was he really influenced? The word influence is tricky when you're making a description like this, but it was almost as if he had these things inchoate inside of him. That spirit in there was there. And what he met in Chinese philosophy, in Chinese language, was a resonance with that. And that's what I was trying to show with the difference in the Chinese language, for example. It was able to, I think, express, using that character of the expression of completing or the manifesting, it was able to bring out for him things that he was feeling intuitively. Maybe that's a way to put it. And same thing for the other, Sanskrit, for all of these other areas. I think he was always reaching for those things that would express something he had a sense of. But I agree with you, because all those years and years, and I heard, did you go to his place? You did, didn't you?
Yeah.
At the Riverdale?
Riverdale, yeah, I was in
And you
Riverdale.
certainly did. Did you? The house I hear about, Charlene used to describe it, and that there was a different room for one was all Chinese and one was all works from India and Greece and so on. I mean, and I'm sure he read them all. And in fact, at the conference, one thing, a piece that he doesn't talk about, because I know he doesn't want to he does still here, spirit, for sure, didn't want to overlay his thought with this. But one of the speakers there, and I thought it was so interesting, his provincial, the man who was a supervisor in the Passionist order, and described what his days were like as a Passionist priest. And so at nights, in between when they get up for prayer in the middle of the night and so on, he had a room that had one of those transoms, and he would cover it over with a blanket so no one could see he had a light on, like a kid, And he would just be reading and reading and reading. And I mean, this man read all of Thomas Aquinas, which apparently, I haven't even read one, apparently takes up a whole shelf, in Latin, for heaven's sakes. And you can just see from the little bit I've shown you of Chinese, how it's just, that language teaches you something that one simple translation out of Wilhelm, where he says, there's just a whole beautiful bunch of stuff from the I Ching, and what the sage does, he's busy without being what, blah, 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 wonderful, all great stuff. And it ends with, and therefore he can practice love. And before I even studied the characters, I'd come upon these things and I'd think, that's why I came up here. I've told you that, because you were the first person I talked to. I wanted to study. I read the Tachuan in English again and again, and I thought there's missing things, missing things, missing things. And so when I finally, that was one of the things that bothered me. I thought, I wonder if that's just the Western way. What would it be in Chinese? But anyway, I don't remember exactly the Chinese, but the point is, you see the subject and the object. You practice love. No. I mean, we would maybe practice love is because you've got a subject and you've got to have verb, you've got to have the object. No, they co-arise. It's all of these things. Out of this comes, love would arise. They're all coming forth at the same time as products that are interrelated of one thing or another. Well, that's just in Chinese. So I'm just saying, Latin is completely different, completely different culture. Sanskrit, India, all of these things. That may also be partly responsible for the depth and breadth of Thomas. Drew was maybe also knew German, all of these things. So he had these different mentalities flowing through him.
Don't forget Dante.
Great point.
Oh, yeah, who could forget Dante? When he went,
We almost did it for a minute.
Yeah.
Actually, but he gave a seminar on Dante frequently. It was one of his most passionate
Oh,
loves.
well, when he taught the Paradiso for Brian's class, when we did the Divine Comedy, he told us that during the war, and I guess it was the Korean War, is that right? The Korean War? Well, no, I know what it was. I finally got this sorted out, because I got thinking, what war is it?
Yeah,
You know?
one of the when the soldiers, when they're studying,
Yeah, remember that? And I finally put together that it was, he had hoped when he joined up, he was a military chaplain, he hoped that they would send him back to the Orient. But they didn't, they sent him to Germany for the reconstruction of Germany.
Right.
And it was post-war, right. And he carried this battered up copy of Dante in his back pocket, and that's what he read to his soldiers at night. I mean, that was
They would read it to each other every night.
he would read it to them.
In Latin?
No, in English, no. Yeah, right, in Latin, in Italian.
Super quick on Dante, when the first summer I studied with him was this Italian-American woman, Elizabeth Ferrera, from St. Thomas University, America. Anyway, she organized a study abroad for the Earth with Thomas Berry in '91. It was the first time I really got to chill with Thomas for an extended period of time.
Wow.
And so then to come around for the next summer, she calls up Thomas, she says, Tom, will you come back for the summer of '92 and do the program again? He says, only on one condition, if I can teach Dante.
Really?
Which was great, but we all wanted to hear about the ecology and the cosmology and everything. So we're like, she's like calling, she's trying to figure out how this is going to work. And so like we kind of figured out a compromise where he taught Dante in the morning, and then in the afternoon he would lecture on Teilhard and ecology and cosmology and all of environmental history. But it was great to study Dante with him. But some of it went over the class's heads as we were waiting.
Well, imagine those poor guys in Germany. I mean, you know, the soldiers. But anyway, but I remember him saying, and I'm sure you've taken the class twice, so you will really remember this. But I remember him saying, as he introduced this, that Dante had in his head all of the knowledge of the then known world that was available in Europe at that time, and it's in the Divine Comedy. And I remember thinking about Thomas Berry. When the time he was gone, he had just about all the knowledge of the then known world in his mind, which he's left behind.
Well, I hate to break up this really fascinating conversation, but we should
Yes,
probably draw to a close.
I can do this.
Is it time for one more, real quick? There was a Chinese philosophical phrase that Yiwu taught me when I was studying with him, and it was gan ying, which is the feeling and response, the method of engaging with the I Ching. And then associated with that was Tian Yuan gan ying, which is the way of humanity and heaven and the feeling and response between the two.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could just speak to that phrase a little bit and apply
You know,
that
I
to-
tell you honestly, I don't think he taught us that phrase.
Okay.
I mean, I want to go back and start all over. What is this, the metaphysics of the...
I Ching,
Yeah.
Max took it as well. Chinese metaphysics and cosmology includes the 10 rings.
And it's been 20 years, but say what it is in English again?
Feeling and response is the gan ying portion,
Oh.
and so that would be the approach to the I Ching or engaging with the natural world. So it would be having the feeling towards that, and
Yes.
that creates the response either from the oracle or from the outside world.
Yes, that's
and then
beautiful.
adding the human part and the heavenly part.
That's that affectivity is Thomas Berry's word that has this feeling between all of these things that's also the heart of the oracular moment as well. I don't want to, is anybody driving up north? You guys driving?
Where do you want to go?
Uh-huh.
Where do you need to get to?
Just right off East Flagdale, just a quarter of a mile.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. Oh, thank you, Robert.
I can't be a hero again. This is very disappointing.
Oh, he was the hero. The woman in distress and waited at a Taco Bell for me out in the middle of me
Taco
nowhere.
Bell.
I've been there.
Taco Bell.
Huh?
Hey, thank
Yes,
you.
no,
Thank you,
thank
Sheri.
Thank you so much.
It's interesting that the Chinese word for emotion
Oh, you know, it would be awful. While he was talking and did that, but if I left without this, my whole world is.
I taught conscious science.
Yeah, that's, the reason I wanted to do this is can you see kind of, I mean, just this stuff is just, and I hadn't even met Nathan White yet. I had done most of my stuff when I saw his wife had seen it. And I'm going, you know, this is just.
You did a Whitehead seminar with Brian? Or?
Yeah. His first Whitehead seminar. This was exciting for me. And I thought, whoa, you know, this is, I mean, the connections are just incredible.
Yeah.
So.
I wonder how much exposure Whitehead himself actually had.
Certainly nothing like, I mean, he wasn't influenced in the way Thomas Berry was. He obviously was very white. And, you know, the East had arrived, Emerson, Thoreau, so, and he, because there was that line across his reality where he says it's more like something. But it'd be interesting
But it's no surprise that the Chinese are
again, she making how it works.
trying to practice.
Yeah, and not just now. He spent, when I first, in my first classes, which go back to like
8-hour grade term.
I had no, well, I ages before. But I remember him saying in passing, this is very different from Western philosophy, except for Western. And he may have said Dewey in passing. So, I mean, that's been acknowledged there for
Thanks,
a while.
Becca. That was good. See ya. Are you in the Jesse's like the embodied?